Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's info session on the Green Claims Directive proposed by the European Commission. This will serve as an opportunity for you to learn more and ask questions about this EU proposal. By way of introduction, I am Gabriel, the MBB's Policy Manager for Sustainability Files. My job here is to follow EU policy developments, gather feedback from businesses, and represent their interests at the EU level. I will be moderating today's webinar. With me, I have MBB President Alison Mitzi to deliver the opening remarks and kickstart our webinar. We also welcome MEP Cyrus Anger, who is the co-rapporteur on the Green Claims file for the ENVI Committee within the European Parliament. This means MEP Anger has a direct hand in drafting the European Parliament's position on this proposal, and he can briefly go over his priorities in this respect. MEP Anger should be joining us in just a couple of minutes. We also have MHRA CEO Andrew Ajus Muscat and the Malta Chamber Policy Executive on Sustainability, Gabby Grech-Larsen, who will be both delivering their organization's perspective on this important topic. Those of you who would like to ask a question throughout the session are encouraged to either use the chat or the Q&A feature built into the Microsoft Teams platform, or if you prefer, you may also use the raise hand button, and I will be able to enable your microphone and camera so you can just ask your question that way. There will be also a dedicated Q&A part at the end of the session where we will answer all of your questions. I will now leave the floor to MBB President Alison Mitzi for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Gabriel. Wait. Yes, I thought I was muted. Hi, thank you, Gabriel, and good afternoon. Member of the European Parliament, Cyrus Anger, participants and guests. First of all, I would like to thank you for showing such a strong interest in this important topic on the EU agenda. Here today, we are going to discuss the need for a robust and transparent framework through which environmental claims made by businesses can be properly substantiated and verified. As we've seen, sustainability claims have increased traction among businesses as well as consumers, and we are every day seeing businesses voluntarily investing in initiatives which improve, one, the efficiency of their operations and reduce their environmental impact. And in here, common measures range from reducing emissions, using more environmentally friendly materials, offering waste management schemes for end-of-life products, and so on. These efforts are truly commendable and should be highlighted as tangible examples to inspire fellow businesses. At the same time, there has been also an unfortunate rise in claims which are somehow vague or very difficult to quantify in practice. Such claims make it challenging for consumers to reliably compare between the sustainability credentials of different products or services. This also creates an uneven playing field at the expense of companies which invest heavily in proper substantiation of their claims. It is for this reason that earlier this year, the European Commission issued a proposal for Green Claims Directive. The proposal seeks to remedy these issues by obliging companies to substantiate the environmental claims they make about consumer products and services and verify such claims through third-party assessors. The Malta Business Bureau welcomes this general objective of this proposal because we believe that these efforts will safeguard the integrity of the EU single market against unfounded claims and protect genuine business activity. We understand that greenwashing is directly opposed to the EU green objectives of reducing environmental impact of human activity and increasing circularity. It introduces the real risk of encouraging the use of products and services which are in fact unsustainable. Environmental claims should assist consumers in making better decisions and to educate them towards more sustainable products. At the same time, we understand that the measures adopted should be proportionate with respect to what they are trying to achieve. Independent verification for every single claim will prove costly, especially for smaller businesses. We must certainly avoid a situation where environmental claims are limited to those who can afford to pay for such verification. It is crucial in this regard that the European Commission and Member States make available appropriate incentives to support compliance with this directive once adopted. We must remember the long list of other EU legislation that will be introduced, their own reporting requirements and heavy administrative burden on companies. To name just a few, there are the Empowering Consumers for Green Transition Directive, the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, the EU Taxonomy, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and also the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. As the business organization of the Malta Business Bureau and the MHRA, our aim is to get a feedback from you and represent your views with EU policy makers and the Maltese government. I thus really encourage an active participation from your end and invite you to share any questions or comments that you have. Now, this is the time to get involved and help shape the future of EU legislation. I wish you a fruitful and healthy discussion and look forward to listening to the contributions of today's speakers. Thank you very much. Gabriel, back to you.
Thank you, Alison, for setting the scene and introducing today's topic. I would now like to quickly move on to MHRA CEO Andrew Ajus-Muscat's intervention before he must leave for another important commitment. So, Andrew, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Alison. Thank you all for being part of this webinar. Basically, the root of the topic here is going green, and it's important that we discuss such initiatives because it is a recognition that our businesses are an important organ of our communities and the environment. And the way we're looking at the future is related to the impact. If our businesses are leaving a negative impact on the community and the environment which surrounds it is high, then of course we have a problem. And nowadays, the international community, but even the private sector community, the businesses themselves are recognizing that we need to evaluate better our impacts because at the end of the day, low impact investments should favor everyone. We should be focusing on how we need to restructure our businesses to manage the impact. Now, the green claims proposal, as being set forward by the European Union, recognizes the situation and recognizes the importance that entities who are investing towards this end can be protected from the so-called cowboys. And of course, we have this topic attracts a lot of also business interests, and we are inundated with organizations knocking our doors as businesses, offering us green labels, green this, green that, because at the end of the day, there's also a demand by customers in favoring entities who choose to go green. But of course, there's also the possibility of organizations who abuse of the situation. Therefore, the green claims proposal aims to protect genuine organizations, of course, from those who are taking advantage of the situation. So in principle, the MHRA, the Malta Hotels and Restaurants Association, cannot but not agree with a proposed legislation which aims to protect the genuine organizations who really believe in sustainable operations. Having said that, of course, as we all know, it's important that proportionality is important in this topic, and I would just say that the importance of keeping it simple. Sometimes, in order to protect and in order to encourage certain green initiatives, we end up creating a lot of procedures, creating a lot of rules and regulations, which make it impossible or difficult for our organizations to adhere to or even understand what needs to be done. So the importance of keeping simplicity at the core of what we're talking here about in order to ensure that the green claims are legitimate. Of course, the hospitality sector is made up of different sizes of organizations, and it's important that such rules and regulations will not just end up favoring the bigger institutions. The hospitality sector is made up by a number of SMEs, and we need to address the realities. Therefore, our appeal is also to take into consideration the need to have clear guidelines, simple guidelines, to avoid the risk from favoring or creating complications for SMEs who genuinely want to go green, but of course the rules and regulations may create difficulties to achieve such objectives. The other thing is incentivize, apart from giving the information, incentivize, keep on offering assistance, not just financial, but even in terms of ideas, create the fora where we bring together our organizations in order to learn of how such claims can be done in the right way, so that we learn from each other, because these are new paths for a number of organizations. And despite that, a number of organizations may genuinely would like to embark on this, on such green initiatives, maybe it would be something new for them. So the more information and the more awareness we create amongst our members, the better it is. So the principle of learning from the best, even for example by creating platforms for such organizations. And also another point that I want to bring up is the giving enough time for the transition. It's important that we don't shift things from night to day. So yes, the European Union has taken its time to discuss and come up with regulations, but many times it happens that our members find such regulations imposed on them in very short time frames. So the importance to recognize even the realities of our organizations who are continuously bombarded with new legislation, with new regulations, which apart from the cost also entails structuring our operations to reflect accordingly the requirements. Going green is critical, is very important, as we are seeing currently in the COP meetings in Dubai. The policymakers many times remain constrained within the rhetoric. So the real change that needs to be done needs to be driven by us, the ones on the front line, our SMEs, our operators, our members. So we need to be very, very sensitive to their requirements, to the realities that we are facing, amongst which the inflation, which of course is affecting our operations, and it hits directly the core of our operations. That is probably the major headache of our operators, apart from coming from the hospitality sector, also the staff shortages. So if one had to place in terms of priorities, inflation and staff recruitment is probably ranked the highest on the agenda of our operators. Having said that, yes, we recognize the importance of going green, the importance of restructuring, engineering operations to go greener. However, the authorities need to recognize the constraints and the realities that our operators, our members, at the end of the day face on a daily basis. So yes, in principle, MHRA on board supports anything which favors sustainable development, always emphasizing, however, a just transition on the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for what I would say is a good summary of the opportunities and the challenges which the proposal will bring. Obviously, it's always a mix of the two, I would say. In the meantime, MEP Cyrus Anger has joined us, so welcome to this webinar, and thank you also for finding the time to join us. Now it's time for my presentation, which will briefly go over the main points of the proposal so we can understand a bit more in detail exactly what is being put forward. Just kind of bear with me while I set up my slides. Okay. So now you should be able to see my slides. If any of you can't see them, please do let me know. Okay, I want to start off with providing some sort of general information on the proposal. Obviously, we've already touched upon certain elements in the first interventions that we've heard today, but essentially what the proposal aims to do is to make environmental claims more reliable and also prevent greenwashing by companies. The idea here is that consumers at the end of the day will be presented with more accurate information about the products and the services that they are buying, and it also creates a more level playing field on the environmental performance of products and services, especially from a marketing perspective, in the way that businesses can promote the environmental credentials and aspects of their products. Importantly here to remember is that the scope is limited to explicit environmental claims, and I will get into exactly what explicit environmental claims means in the next slide. So explicit environmental claims which are not mandated by EU law. So what this means is that these claims are voluntary. There is no legislation or law or policy which is obliging companies to make the statement. So this is a voluntary statement which companies are making about their products and services. There is also an exemption from the substantiation and verification procedures, which I will get into later on, for micro enterprises. Now, obviously, you could say that definitions sometimes can be a bit obvious, but I like to think that it's best to define the terms clearly and know exactly what the European Commission is meaning when it is using certain terminology. So when we're discussing environmental claim, what the EU means, what the European Commission means is, as I said, it is not mandatory under union law, so it is voluntary. And it states or implies that a product or trader has a positive or no impact on the environment, or is less damaging to the environment than other products or traders, respectively, or has improved their impact over time. So obviously it is quite a wide understanding of what an environmental claim is. But we also have to understand exactly what an explicit environmental claim is, because that is the scope of the proposal that we're discussing. And what this word explicit adds to this definition is that it means an environmental claim that is in textual form or contained in a sustainability label. So basically this directive captures both written claims, environmental statements, but also environmental claims which are made through some sort of pictorial or graphical methods, such as an eco-label, for example. So the first major point of the proposal is substantiating environmental claims. Here, the idea is that businesses will be obliged to substantiate claims that they are making according to a set of tangible requirements which the European Commission has put forward in the proposal. I will not go into the detail about every single point, because there are quite a few, but I will also share this information after the webinar, so you can go over the requirements at your leisure. But just to go, mention them briefly, you have, for example, specifying if the claim is related to the entire product or just to part of it, whether the claim relies on some widely recognized scientific evidence and international standards, whether the claim is considering all environmental aspects or environmental impacts which are significant with respect to that product or service, demonstrating that the claim is not equivalent to some standard which is already required by law. There's also providing information whether the business making the claim performs significantly better environmentally than what is common practice in that industry or in that sector. Importantly, the claim must also separate any greenhouse gas emission offsets and similar information, specifically when reporting, for example, emission figures. And also, companies should include primary and secondary information available to the trader relating to the claim. Now, the Commission has also introduced additional requirements for claims which are comparative. And basically, what a comparative claim is a claim which compares the economic aspects or economic performance of a particular product or service with that of other competitors or other businesses. So you could say, for example, that my product is more sustainable in whatever way than that of my competitors. That would be a comparative claim. And the whole idea behind these additional set of requirements is that, the comparative claim is made in a fairer manner, and you're not trying to misrepresent the facts, to put your product ahead of that of your competitor in an unfair way. So the requirements would be, for example, providing information and data used to make the assessment is equivalent and sourced in an equivalent manner for each product or trader, that the comparison should cover the same stages along the value chain, that the most significant environmental aspects should be taken into consideration when making the claim, and any assumptions made about the products or services should also be set in an equivalent manner. Now, of course, the whole idea behind all these requirements is that businesses can only make environmental claims which comply with these substantiation requirements. And they will also be obliged to supply this relevant information tied to the substantiation in some physical form along with the claim through something like a link, a QR code, or equivalent. Now, the substantiation is still the first step in this whole process, but the Commission actually goes a bit further to also require companies that are making environmental claims to engage third-party verifiers to verify the claims that they are substantiating, to basically verify the substantiation. So member states themselves will set up these verification procedures for businesses, and national accreditation bodies within member states will be tasked to accredit verifiers to carry out such verification. Of course, I think it's needless to say the verifiers themselves have to be independent from the product or the service or the business that they are assessing. And upon successful verification, a certificate of conformity will be provided to that company tied specifically to the claim that they are making, which can then be used across the EU. Now, that is sort of the first part of the Green Claims Directive, which is tied to substantiation and verification. But there's also another related part which focuses specifically on labeling requirements, specifically environmental labeling schemes. Of course, these schemes have to, first of all, abide by the substantiation and verification requirements, which I mentioned earlier. But the Commission here again goes further, and it actually introduces other requirements which environmental labeling schemes have to comply with. What is important to note here is that this directive applies, as I already mentioned, to voluntary claims. And that also means that it applies to voluntary labels. So any label which is established under EU law does not fall within scope of this proposal. So something like the eco label, for example, which locally I think is most popular with hotels. Since it is already established under EU law and it is robust and we can ensure its reliability, something like that would not fall under the scope of this proposal. Now, so information requirements tied to labeling schemes include, for example, information on the scheme owner and its decision-making bodies, information on the scheme's objectives, what are the conditions on joining the scheme, and how these should be proportionate to the size of the companies that are seeking to join. So these do not exclude SMEs, for example, who might have less capacity to invest in joining such schemes. There's also the idea that scheme requirements should be developed by experts in the field. And there should also be compliance and dispute resolution mechanisms built into the schemes in case of disputes between, for example, the scheme owner and its participants. And there should be procedures to deal with non-compliance. Now, it is important to note is that labels which introduce somehow some sort of rating system or score or whatever, something similar, will only be allowed if they are established under EU law. So this labels which, so for example, private labels or national labels which have a rating system would not be compliant with this directive. They have to be established under EU law. Also, member states through this directive will not actually be allowed to create new environmental labeling schemes. The Commission's reasoning here is that it wants to avoid having a proliferation of too many different schemes entering the market, and there needs to be a bit more control on the amount of schemes being introduced. And existing schemes which are already on the market will be maintained if they fall in line with the directive. When it comes to third country schemes, so schemes which come from outside of the EU, these will be accepted within the EU subject to European Commission approval. And also when it comes to private schemes, they will be approved if they are considered to add value in terms of their environmental impacts. Now, the final point on compliance and penalties, obviously the competent authorities will be empowered to carry out regular checks of the environmental claims being made and to ensure that companies are being compliant with the directive. The authorities can also receive complaints from natural or legal persons against traders where there is suspicion that perhaps they are not complying with these requirements. And obviously, there can also be penalties in cases where non-compliance is considered, and the penalties can be calculated according to a number of criteria, such as, for example, the gravity of the infringement, whether the infringement was negligent or intentional by the company, the financial strength of the infringer, and also, for example, the economic benefits derived from the infringement, among other criteria. But I just listed a couple of them here. So that is a very quick overview of the green claims proposal. Obviously, I couldn't go into too much detail about every single point, but it should give you an overview of what the main objectives are. These are my contact details in case you'd like to get in touch to either ask about this or any other aspect relating to sustainability on the EU agenda. As I mentioned, there is a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so if you have any questions specifically on the file, please do put your questions forward. Now, I would like to invite MEP Enger to deliver an intervention as co-rapporteur on the Green Claims proposal. MEP Enger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriel, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good that the MBB has come up with this important discussion today. It's something that I think that we need to have much more of on the different legislation that we work on here in Brussels, not only within the European Parliament, but also when it comes to government and the Council of Ministers. And I want to thank Gabriel and Daniel from MBB as well as a number of other Maltese organizations for reaching out from the beginning of this file that we've been given. It's always good to have, the voice of the Maltese industry and those that are affected on the ground by the legislation that we would be working on. So I heard a bit what Andrew was saying earlier as well. I came in at that moment in time. Unfortunately, I can't stay very long because we have a number of other meetings, but I will go a bit on the point of what we're doing with regards to the Green Claims Directive. Gabriel explained very well what the Commission proposed when it comes to green claims. I want to give a bit of context to understand why we have arrived at this proposal. Firstly, as you all know, I think that this Commission's legacy, at least, is going to be probably environmental legislation. Now, sometimes it was tough. On other times, the legislation proposed was quite good. I think that we all agree that we need an ambitious legislation when it comes to the environment. But at the same time, and this is where we come in usually, MEPs from small member states, is that a one-size-fits-all piece of legislation does more harm than good in certain particular circumstances. And this is maybe one of the opportunities we had, having the Green Claims Directive in our hands to draft ourselves the actual European Parliament position, helps people coming from small member states, but also others that identify that in different member states you might have different realities and different sectors might have different realities. So that's something that at least was a positive, although there were many others, by having been given this piece of legislation to draft and negotiate here in the European Parliament. But background, it's through studies that the European Commission has conducted. 53% of all green claims in the European Union have been found to either be false, exaggerating, or misleading. At the same time, the Guardian in the United Kingdom held an investigation with regards to carbon offsetting, and it found out that over 92% of carbon offsetting claims were misleading, inaccurate, or totally fake. So something needed to be done. I think that this was the remaining gap in the legislation, the Fit for 55 and Green Deal legislations, and it really goes in well, fits in well with the empowering consumers for the green transition and also the eco-design legislation. This is then the third one that brings everything together. I won't go into the different details that Gabriel went into. That is what the law is based on. I will speak more on what we have been trying to do here as a rapporteur on this file. I'm not alone, we're two rapporteurs, so I'm the rapporteur from the ENVI committee, and there is also another rapporteur from Estonia from the IMCO committee, and together we came up with the report that has been published and presented in the European Parliament already. Now, just for some technical information, after our report, we have received a number of amendments from the different groups. Obviously, we have consolidated those into a number of compromise amendments, and we had already the first technical meeting on these amendments, and tomorrow there will be the second meeting. We're hoping to have a Parliament position on this file by the end of this mandate. So we're eyeing the March plenary, but if we don't make it by the March plenary, I'm sure that then we'll make it for the last plenary, which is the April plenary at the very end of the month of April. So I agree a lot with what Andrew said and what he wished to see in this, and I thank MHRA for the continuous information that they send us all the time, not only on this piece of legislation, but on other ones that we had. Andrew mentioned simple guidelines and help those that genuinely want to really go green. And that is what we wanted to have. So firstly, it's important as a European Union to have a more harmonized way of our claims. We are in a single market. In Malta, we import a lot from abroad. We offer a lot of services as well outside of Malta, and I think that harmonization between the 27 member states on the way green claims are done is important. Then it will be up to the different member states to actually implement it, obviously, with their realities taken on board and in mind. So what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve, first of all, any claims that are made need to be verified. They need to be verified using scientific ways. And science ultimately is the only way through which we can really verify whether a claim is true or not. And we want to see more competitiveness. I think that one of the major challenges that the European Union has at the moment is its competitiveness in general when it comes to other markets globally. But then we also want to see the competitiveness within our member states and within the Union for those companies and organizations that actually operate in the same business. I know many try to be as environmental as possible, but then sometimes you get these organizations that simply put out there a lot of environmental claims. None of them would be true. They would be able to maybe sell their products or services at a cheaper price, and consumers would be believing that these are companies that are operating with an environmental conscience, and in reality they wouldn't be. So we want to increase the competitivity of those who are genuine, as Andrew said, but apart from that, those who are not genuine should either stop their claims or else move towards a real environmental way of doing things. Apart from that, we wanted to see that in all that we have done so far when it comes to environmental law, that we leave no one behind, and that any green transition should have a social conscience and be a just transition. So that is where where we wanted to go with our report. So if I could maybe summarize what our draft now report, maybe it's slightly different to what the Commission has proposed. We have our report is based on the Commission's proposals, obviously with some minor tweaks, but we looked specifically at 11 key points that we wanted to have in this report, and I'll mention them one by one. So there are 11 points. So firstly, that we should have regular revisions of environmental labeling schemes to enable their continuous improvement. We know technology is evolving all the time, realities are evolving all the time, and we wanted to make sure that whatever is ultimately agreed would lead to regular revisions of the environmental labels. Secondly, we wanted to have measures that would ultimately incentivize the use of primary information over secondary information, the importance of science-based verification procedures, which for us should be the basis on which claims are made when it comes to the environment. Thirdly, we wanted to safeguard any explicit environmental claims which are related to the future performance of a trader. Then we wanted to have diverse participation in the preparation of delegated acts. So maybe, I don't know whether everyone would know what delegated acts are, but for us, when it comes to the European Commission, then coming up and in the future with the different ways of implementation and where the Commission is delegated to take these decisions, we wanted to ensure that whenever the Commission decides, there would be the participation of civil society, of organizations, of companies, of the industry on board with the Commission before any delegated acts are come into force. Then we wanted to see that measures that cover all forms of environmental claims, including sustainability labels, which cover environmental aspects, should be included. We wanted to clarify the concept of what widely recognized scientific evidence is, because in the Commission's proposal, things were quite vague. I'm sure many of you have followed not only this legislation, but a number of other pieces of law in the past few weeks and months. And I mentioned, for instance, the packaging and waste packaging regulation, where the Commission somehow was coming up with a lot of vagueness in the law and vague terms and the usage of certain words which could have very different meanings. And we wanted to make sure that when it comes to the scientific evidence that is needed for verification, this would be clear in what kind of scientific evidence you are talking about. Then we wanted to have further predictability on the future of existing private environmental labeling schemes following the entry into force of the directive. We wanted to see more transparency, so we were suggesting the strengthening of transparency requirements for consumers to have better access to information used in the substantiation of these explicit environmental claims. Then we also felt that it was needed that we prohibit the explicit environmental claims on products that contain certain hazardous substances, obviously, except when the use of these hazardous substances is considered to be essential to society. And I think as a Maltese member, coming from a small country, we wanted to protect as much as possible not only micro enterprises, but also SMEs. As you know, and as Gabriel has said, in the Commission's proposal, micro enterprises are not included in these requirements. They define micro enterprises as those having 10 employees or less, and that have a revenue of less than 2 million euros per year. And we wanted to see that, first of all, those micro enterprises that want to join voluntarily can do so. But secondly, that we support both micro enterprises and SMEs to lower the administrative burden when it comes to the implementations of the obligations emanating from this directive. This was one of our main goals, actually, because sometimes, as you all know and experience, when it comes to the bureaucrats in the offices of the European Commission, they tend not to understand the realities on the ground of SMEs. So for us, this was very important. Apart from that, my co-rapporteur, Ansip, from the IMCO committee, who works a lot on SMEs, this was one of his main priorities. And it was good that from the SND, from the MV committee, it is myself writing this because, as I said, coming from a small countries, SMEs are very important to us, and we can understand maybe even better the realities on the ground. So his views, together with mine, are maybe doing something which we didn't find in many other pieces of legislation, where also the Environment Committee is taking maybe a deeper note of what the realities of SMEs are. And finally, the 11th point is, which was another priority for us on this file, was the protection of consumers against misleading claims based on carbon offsetting. And we have seen many of these over the years, and we felt that this should really be included in the law. There were some moves not to have this, but I think when you see the Guardian's investigation, it's very difficult not to take note of those particular claims and also include them in the proposal, in the law. I don't want to take too much time. That said, I'll just summarize a bit what our main focus is when it comes to when it came to writing the actual report of the European Parliament, but then also what our main positions were. So firstly, we wanted to have the simplest way of having claims being made and verified in our union. Secondly, apart from them being simple, it was very important to have harmonization when it comes to this. I've spoken a number of times with the chamber, the Malta Chamber, as well as the Chamber of SMEs, on a number of other issues relating to harmonization. I believe that for us, many times, as a small country that imports a lot, that exports also, etc., having one system across the European Union is to our benefit. Then we wanted to see that any claim is based on scientific evidence. Thirdly, we wanted to make sure that our industry, and especially those who are genuine with their environmental claims, are competitive, and we boost their competitiveness. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure that when it comes to micro enterprises and SMEs, we aid as much as possible these organizations in order to make sure that we do not add unnecessary burdens on an already quite burdensome number of regulations and directives that we have that are important to the environment. Obviously, we need to be as environmental as possible, but at the same time, ensure that we do not allow anyone to fall behind. Any transition should be a just transition, and as socialists, obviously, this is very important to us to make sure that the smallest among us are not ending up bearing a bigger burden than they should, and apart from that, leaving them totally behind from the process. My office is always open. As I said, we've been in contact with Gabriel and Daniel on various issues, including green claims. MHRA have been quite engaging with us on this file and on others. We had as I said, the packaging, for instance, which was very important to them as well. Our office is always open. Feel free to contact myself or my assistant Nicholas, who is taking care of the Environment Committee. So any questions? Unfortunately, I can't stay here very long because I have a meeting coming up very soon. But If you have any questions, would like some clarifications, want us to understand some issue that we might not be aware of, don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll definitely contact you back and give you all the information that you need. Thank you.
So thank you, MEP Anger, for those very good insights into the policy-making process within the European Parliament and the priorities that you have identified for this file. Obviously, I know your schedule doesn't permit, but if you manage to stay here for a part of the Q&A section, you are obviously more than welcome. As I mentioned, please do put your questions forward, but I know that we are experiencing some technical issues with the Teams Q&A feature. It's not loading for some reason. So I kindly ask anyone who has any questions, either use the chat or just raise your hand and we'll enable your microphone and camera. Now, lastly, but certainly not least, I will leave the floor for the Malta Chamber Policy Executive on Sustainability, Gabby Grech-Larsen, to deliver the Chamber's perspective on the issues that we've discussed today about green claims and greenwashing, especially from a sustainability angle. Gabby, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I don't know actually what's left to say. This was a very, very thorough presentation. Thank you, everyone, for the input. So I'm Gabby Grech-Larsen, and I form part of the Malta Chamber's policy team, within which I'm responsible for sustainability, as Gabriel mentioned. Some members may have come across my name over email or phone calls. I'm often trying to disseminate information and asking for feedback on topics related to energy and water, the circular economy and waste management, as well as sustainable transport and logistics and ESG-related matters. As you all probably know, MBB are the Malta Chamber's EU advisory arm, and for those not aware of the Malta Chamber's work, I just wanted to give a brief moment to wrap up our structure and operation. Our principal mission is to represent companies from all economic sectors, which can be categorized into three main economic groups. Namely manufacturing, importers and distributors, and service providers. And under each group, there are a number of business sections, such as, for example, let's say electronics in manufacturing, retailers under importers and distributors, and, for example, lawyers under service providers. Now, the Green Claims Directive actually touches upon all our economic sectors and practically on every business section. Horizontally, then, and applicable to all economic groups and business sections, we have 5 thematic committees, which give a broader view on every, or which fit into every single area that we represent. And these include economic growth and resilience, digitalization, human capital, governance, and sustainability. It's important to note that actually sustainability within the horizontal thematic committees is the only one that has a dedicated policy executive for obvious reasons. Obviously, as we know, sustainability is high on the agenda for all businesses. And as the National Chamber of Commerce, we recognize and firmly believe as well in the importance of sustainability as the foundation on which Malta's future should rest. Our policy recommendations aim to achieve this transition both as a country, as businesses, and as individuals. So I'd like to take a bit of a different perspective, maybe going a bit deeper into why would one need to make a green claim in the first place? Well, as we've been talking a lot about science, the science is very clear. The consequences of human-induced climate change are becoming increasingly palpable, perhaps the most obvious ones being the extreme climate events that we are observing around the globe. And behind the scenes and hidden by headlines, the Earth's ability to sustain us is reducing at an alarming rate as a result of nature loss, resource extraction, and climate change too. So the level of climate and nature-related risks in the global economy is escalating, and we are in a position of increased vulnerability to its transitional and physical impacts. This is, in fact, a decisive decade where our ambitions, choices, and actions will steer the planet's trajectory until the end of the century and beyond. So this is now a business imperative, where on a global scale, a clear manifestation of this transition is the regulatory environment, as we've been discussing throughout this webinar. Investors increasingly looking at ESG disclosures to guide their decisions, and not least discerning consumers, customers, and employees placing a company's sustainability performance as a premium when choosing products, services, or even a workplace. Expectations and attitudes are changing, and for a large part of people in the EU, environmental protection is important to them personally. In fact, the vast majority consider that the most effective way of tackling environmental problems is to make changes to the way we consume, produce, and trade, and therefore championing these sustainable practices by responding to stakeholder demand is, of course, one of the most effective paths towards increasing value. So within the broader context of the European Green Deal, which aims to make Europe an example of caring for our planet, and many genuine improvements are happening, the rise in unsubstantiated claims and environmental messages presents an opposing force, a very damaging one, which not only slows but hinders the real actions that need to take place. So if everybody is moving in a direction where they are looking for and seeking for environmentally sound products, and these products are being sold as environmentally sound but have a terrible background, let's say, to them, then this is obviously halting the transition that we need to be making. Just as an example, and it was mentioned earlier on as well, is that a commission study found that 40% of green claims made by companies were completely unsubstantiated. And this creates obviously a vague, misleading, and unfounded way of presenting information, and it undermines the credible efforts of those who are actually doing their utmost to reduce their emissions, to ensure that their supply chain is as environmentally low in its footprint as possible. So in a nutshell, in this case, we do need pledges to avert climate change and nature loss, but at the same time, these need to be matched by concrete and measurable action. At the same time, whilst this is a major compliance exercise, we went through a number of problems, including simplicity, proportionality, that SMEs might have maybe a harder time. At the same time, if we want to look at the opportunity of it, businesses that are genuinely environmentally friendly, it can actually be an advantageous differentiator, because those companies who were larger and who might have been giving wrong information out are now set aside and will need to embark on the same kind of journey where they are actually looking into and doing it in a scientifically robust manner. Obviously, the challenges and the trickle-down demands that are imposed by both the climate and nature crisis are a tough challenge for all businesses. And to this end, I'd just like to say that the Malta Chamber is gearing up to a very active 2024, where we will be holding several workshops, seminars, and events, both to create a more awareness locally about the different aspects of the green transition. We know the CSRD is coming. Previously, we thought, no, it doesn't apply to us because we're mostly SMEs, but now it's becoming very obvious that the trickle-down effects of these regulations are heading towards us, as we are obviously members of the supply chain of these larger companies. So my aim within sustainability is, apart from working on the policy aspects, it is also working on the ground with our members and helping each other in a collaborative way, because I believe that this transition is really not going to happen without collaboration. I would like to reach out to members. I would like for our members to come to us and to ask us questions, tell us what they need, give us ideas of areas which are really vague and blurry. And together we will work on making sure that each and every company in Malta knows the direction in which they're facing, and also that we have a common vision as a business community. We're committed to empowering our members, so with the knowledge, tools, and support needed to meet these challenges, and hope that in this way Malta will grow in a robust and resilient and sustainable manner ultimately. So that's it from my end.
So thank you very much, Gabby, for providing an overview, partly on the scientific and and the environmental reasons of why such a proposal is important, but also touching upon how the chamber, as an organization and as a business representative, is working on the issue of sustainability more broadly, but how you can also help businesses, especially as you said, the smaller businesses which might not have the resources or the capacity to go at these major challenges alone. I actually do not see any questions in the chat, or I do not see any raised hands. So again, please come forward if you have any questions. This is the end of the webinar, so now is the time to ask questions. So I see a question from Cheryl Marie Bedzina. Will there be any prohibited green claims / terms such as sustainable, carbon neutral, green, or will they be regulated? And what scientific evidence will be required, such as product environmental footprint, for example? So to answer your first question, Cheryl, again, the whole point of the proposal is to have that any claim that is made properly substantiated and verified. Now, to me, if you are just saying, for example, that your product is sustainable, that is very vague. And it is not clear exactly how to substantiate that statement. If, for example, you're saying that your product is sustainable because it is consuming less energy than a previous iteration of that product, for example, that is a different thing. But to me, saying just, for example, you're sustainable, carbon neutral, or the more very vague terms, it will not be in line with the proposal. Specifically on the point of carbon neutral, for example, we also have to point back to a part of the proposal which says that carbon offsets should also not be counted when making statements about emissions, for example. So that is another consideration that companies have to make. In terms of what scientific evidence, to give you a bit of insight into the European Commission's reasoning, at first it was considering obliging the mandatory use of product environmental footprint, but then it decided to be more flexible, and it does not require any specific methodology in order to carry out the substantiation and verification. Again, as MEP Angela said, this could also lead to a bit of vagueness sometimes, because what do we mean by scientific evidence or reliable scientific evidence? But this is the part that the European Commission has taken so far, which again can be amended by the Parliament and by the Council as the negotiations continue. So, any other questions? So I see a question from Chris Bonello. If the product is not manufactured in Malta, for example, it is imported, will the claim made by the manufacturer be enough, or would the customer need to verify that any positive sustainable impact is actually achieved? So here you have to consider two possibilities. So let's consider a product which is manufactured within the EU, and then you have a local company which is distributing that product within Malta. So if the statement is being made by the company, by the actual manufacturer, then that manufacturer needs to comply with the directive and substantiate and then verify that claim, and also get the certificate of conformity from the verifier that we mentioned. Again, the certificate, since we have a single market with all the free movement benefits within Europe, that certificate can then be used anywhere in the EU. Then obviously, if the manufacturer is outside of the EU, it is a bit more complicated because locally in their own country, they probably do not have similar legislation or similar requirements. But in order to export their products and bring them into the EU, they also need to abide by these requirements since they are selling on the EU market. And just to add to this, it's not actually the customer verifying the positive environmental impact, but it's a accredited verifier that is confirming that, listen, what you are saying is correct, and then you are awarded a certificate of conformity, which the customer can view, for example. I do not see any other question. So will any services, not products, of a local organization fall within scope? So our understanding so far is that this directive captures products, service, and also business activity. So obviously marketing and promotional material can focus not just on the product and service that you're selling, but perhaps also on what the company itself is doing internally. So it obviously is quite a wide, there's quite a wide scope of types of claims that can be captured. I do not see any other questions. Again, I mentioned if you have any other questions even which come up after this session, please do get in touch. I would be happy, obviously, to help. Thank you for finding the time to join us. Thank you also to all of our speakers, even though Gabby is the only one left because all of them have other commitments. Obviously, it is quite a busy time before we stop for the Christmas break. But I thank all of them for finding the time to join us. I hope that you found this session a useful one and an interesting one. And I have to say that the EU policy process is working very fast, especially now before the next year's MEP elections. So I really stress that now is the time to get involved and give feedback, not just on this, but on any other legislation which you are concerned about or you are thinking about. You would be amazed how fast things move all of a sudden. So please, obviously, if you have any other issues or concerns or feedback that you'd like to put forward, do get in touch with myself, with Gabby at the chamber, with the MHRA. We're all here to help you.